Dear colleagues, let's start the session of the Dissertation Council for the defense of a thesis by Apraksin Rostislav V with the degree of Candidate of Chemical Sciences, specialty 020005, Electrochemistry, on the theme Influence of Conducting Polymer Binder on Properties of Cathode Materials for Lithium-ion Batteries. Let me remind you that according to the order number 1, our university has been granted the right to award degrees in and the procedure for awarding degrees regulated by the university, and the members of the Dissertation Council are appointed for each session. As order also appointed chairman of the Dissertation Council and appointed respondent the member. Let me introduce the Institute, Valery Milan, Doctor of Chemical Sciences, Professor, Department of Electrochemistry of our university. Alexander Mikhailovich Timonov, Doctor of Chemical Sciences, Professor, Senior Researcher at your Valery Pavlovich Tolstoy, Doctor of Chemical Sciences, Professor, Department of Solid-State Chemistry of our university, and in Evgeny Anatoly Streltsov, Doctor of Sciences, Professor, Head of the Chemistry Department of the Belarus State University, Belarus. Has been online and has been translated from Russian English. And let me remind you, and let me also remind you to disable your mobile phones, switch them to flight mode. The procedure shall be as follows. This procedure been set by the university decrees, so our session shall not take more than 2 hours. Should not take more than 2 hours. I have 5 minutes for this preliminary remark. Next, the applicant will have 15 minutes for his presentation, but I think the applicant's report and answers to questions, that shall be the main point of our session. So I suggest, if you don't mind, to give more time, no more than 20-25 minutes to the applicant. That shall be followed by questions to the applicant, answers. Please make your questions short, as each question should not take more than 2 minutes. And there's no limit for how long it should take the applicant to answer, but let's stick to reason, common sense. That shall be followed by speeches of the members of the Dissertation Council, no more than 10 minutes. The chairman shall be the last one to speak. After that, the applicant shall answer comments and questions of the members of the Dissertation Council. That should not take more than 15 minutes. If there is a need, we may allocate more time to that. After that shall be followed by the open discussion. All the attendees may, but in that case, they should put their names on the registration sheet. After that discussion, the applicant shall answer questions and comments, and that should not take more than 5 minutes. Then the academic advisor shall have 3 minutes for his speech. That shall be followed by a discussion. That will be discussion. For that time, all the attendees shall have to leave the room, and audio and video shall be suspended. That shall be opened by the open individual voting and making their decision on awarding or awarding the degree of applicant, and that should be followed by the closing remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. I would also like to inform you that the application was submitted by the order of Academic Secretary St. Petersburg on the 15th of November 2019, and the applicant submitted all the necessary documents. I would like to say that he published 5 works outlining the main scientific results, 4 in journals indexed in the scientific database Web of Science and Scopus, and applicant graduated master's program with honors diploma, and all other documents he submitted in order. And I think I can give now the floor to the applicant for his presentation. Good afternoon, dear members of the Dissertation Council. Start my presentation. The energy-saving devices are lithium-ion batteries. Due to high density and low charge, these devices are used in portable electronics and vehicles. However, there are many scientific and practical tasks for their further improvement. A promising approach to improving the materials of lithium-ion is the use of conductive polymers such as poly-3,4-LNX6 doped with polystyrene sulfonate. This unique conductivity and electrical activity with the mechanical properties of polymers. Since the battery's electrode material is and consists of both active material and conductive additive, it's from a practical point particularly interesting to use conductive polymer as a binder. Replacing the traditional dielectric binder with a conductive polymer can result in a number of positive effects, such as increased conductivity. In addition, the conductive polymer can perform dual both a conducting additive and a binder, thus completely or partly replacing inactive battery components, which will result in an increase of specific material capacity. However, despite the promising approach, at present is a limited number of works on the use of conducting polymer binders in LIA. Thus, the purpose of this work was to characterize the influence of a conducting polymer binder on the properties of cathode materials based on lithium metal phosphates, and to select compositions of electrodes conducting polymer binder with the best functional characteristics. To achieve this goal, it was necessary to address a number of tasks, such as to study properties of a binder based on to prepare electrode material differing content in active components, to study their physical and chemical properties, and on the basis of obtained regularities to materials with the optimal properties. The objects in my paper were commercially available cathode material, lithium iron phosphate and lithium manganese phosphate mixed with iron phosphate, LFMP, iron manganese ratio of 0.4 to 0.6. Additional binder, we used carboxymethyl cellulose. Its main role was to improve the rheological properties of the material and to improve adhesion of the material to the standard. The electrode materials with traditional binder, polyvinylidene fluoride, were used. In the first stage, we studied properties of polymer films Petersburg PSS and Petersburg PSS CMC, measured the electroactivity and conductivity, alkyl carbonate electrolytes, low electrochemical activity, and preservational electron activity, in a bipotential range was shown by means of cyclic voltammetry, as spectroscopy, and UV and visible ranges. These properties make PEDOT-PSS stand out among other conducting polymers. Next was electrode materials prepared according to the following scale. All components were mechanically mixed. The resultant mixture was applied on base. Samples were vacuum dried at 80 degrees Celsius, rolled and then used as a cathode in the standard type coin cell batteries with lithium anode. Accordingly, all potentials are later listed below. In my work, I get a series of formulations for LVP, LVMP. The compositions were different in content and types of additives. In the numbers, in the names, but the content of additives is each listed in the order they are listed in the table. Explanation will help the composition content in the future. The compositions were applied on the aluminum base, formed layers with 15-20 microns. Since materials were containing PSS and CMC contained less binding element, and important characteristics was uniformity and biodistribution in the material. And based on index data, we can say that the sulfur signals from in PEDOT rings or sulfonics are distributed fairly evenly, which speaks signals even distribution. Also, composition has been investigated, but the method as charge doesn't change the composition of the material. All received compositions have been investigated by method galvanostatic charge discharge. The slide shows the charge discharge curves for LVP, LVMP solutions, currents 1C. 1C is current which discharge occurs at 1 hour. 0.2C respectively takes 5 hours. For all compositions, is a lone plateau with a potential about 1.5 volt, which corresponds to the process of ion recharge. For LVMP, with the potential, as additional plateau appears, which corresponds to the manganese recharging process. For all formulations with PEDOT, PSS, and CMC, there's an increase in capacity about 15 to 17%. One of the reasons for such increase is the increase in the share of active substance in the composition of the cathode material. But measurements at high discharge rate show that the difference in capacity between the standard electron PEDOT PSS and CMC formulation increases and the discharge rate increases. This is especially true for LVP-based materials at 5C. So the standard electrode is not working, capacity is close to zero, and while it should be noted that among the lowest capacity demonstrated was in modified electrodes for compositions that do not contain the additive. To understand this reason, the reason for such difference, the composition was studied using cyclic pyrometry. For all compositions, there was a pronounced peak corresponding to oxidation reduction of iron. In case of LVMP, there's also an additional peak pair corresponding to the transformation of manganese. All the compositions with PEDOT, PSS, and CMC have a marked decrease in the potential difference between the cathode and anode peaks. In addition, there's a sharp change in the shape of peaks. For example, composition of PS, C, and CMC characterized by sharper and narrower peaks. This may indicate a decrease in the kinetic limitations of recharging processes. These assumptions were tested by electrochemical spectroscopy. The slide shows spectra in Nyquist coordinates for LFP and LFMP based formulations in charged state. The characteristic semicircle in the mid-range region corresponds to the charge transfer process, and the diameter of the semicircle corresponds to the charge transfer resistance. We can see that the modification leads to a significant reduction in resistance, and the highest value of carbon free formulations. There's a good convergence between impedance data, cyclic voltapyrometry, and electroplating measurements at elevated discharge rates. Further, from the analysis of low frequency region of impedance relation here, the Warburg constants were calculated. This parameter allows to characterize diffusion processes in the material. And as these tables show, for compositions with P.PCSMC, lower values of Warburg constants are observed, which may indicate a decrease, which may also contribute to efficient operation of materials and higher discharge rates. On the basis of obtained regularities, compositions with optimal characteristics were identified. The organic diagram shows that in case of both LFP and LFMP, both P.PSSCMC formulations are characterized by higher values of both specific energy and specific power, but the highest values, best values, obtained for composition based on LFMP. This composition also we also studied its stability. It's good value. Stability value is good, really good. A drop in capacity for 100 cycles of charge was less than 1%. So this formulation was selected for more testing, long-term testing, battery composition against the lithium-titanium anode. The drop in capacity in 1,000 cycles was 16%, which is quite a good result. And this type of composition could potentially be used in practice. In conclusion, we'd like to consider how the results obtained fit into the wild achievements in the modification of materials of this type. This diagram shows specific capacities normalized for the mass of active substance, blue columns, and mass of the electrode, active substance, conducting binder. So these are green columns. On the numbers 1 and 2, we may see compositions from our work with PVDF and P.PSSMC. And numbers 3 to 15 present data from recent publications, which are summarized below. It's obvious that though by capacity is quite average, but by capacity normalized to the electrodes takes the leading position, which may symbolize high efficiency of approach I used in my work. In conclusion, I'd like to make a number of conclusions. First, the binding based on P.PSSCMC mixtures suitable as a binder in lithium-ion batteries, replacing the traditional binder with conducting polymer improves all the basic specific characteristics of the battery and provides good stability. improvement in performance associated with both increase in the mass fraction of the active material and a reduction in kinetic and diffusion restrictions, which has been shown by independent methods based on the obtained regularities. Compositions with optimal characteristics were selected, and these compositions are not inferior to the world best analogues. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Rostislav Valerievich. Dear colleagues, the work is now open for discussion. Please ask questions, if any. Valery Pavlovich, I have a question. Please go back to slide 18. Among these 16, do you have any examples of electrodes with conducting polymers? Other examples? Or PVDF was only was used? About not that many works on binding polymers. 3, 5, 6, 7, 9. These are with binding polymers for sure. And in my opinion, the others are without, but I tried to make a combination with binding polymers and without binding polymers with other components. Andrei Nikolaevich, conducting polymers include PDOT, PSS? Yes, they do. So, my approach, the approach that we are suggesting is in most suggest to completely replace the PDOT, PSS, so the two-component composition. But one of the results I achieved is that to achieve better properties, it's necessary to add some carbon soot. Without soot, highest charge transfer speed we obtained, and in most other works did not use soot. Alexander Mikhailovich Timonov, despite worsening of some properties when carbon is removed from the composition of the electrode, it's known that in that case achieve better safety. And this is very important, and in Russia as well great importance is applied to this. I understand from your work that you did not focus on this issue specifically. Your composition for fire safety and self-ignition. So how will you characterize your composition after having read many other works? So that's quite a thank you for this quite complicated question. Indeed, we did not study such properties specifically. What I may suggest, by using the binding agent, residual water may result in some side processes, some additional layers of acid. So these side processes may, in the end, result in breaks down, and but secondly, to answer this question well, it's necessary to study this process in detail. And as Valery Pavlovich noticed, this question, we had questions about the residual water content Thank you. Maybe Evgeny Anatolyevich Streltsov has questions.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
У меня два
I
вопроса.
have two questions.
Первый такой более
First
общего
question is
плана.
more of a more general nature.
Не только полученные выводы, что, несомненно, имеет первостепенное значение, но и выявление перспектив дальнейших.
Identifying the
И вам
potential
видите
was
исследования в свете полученных результатов.
first, what's
Первый вопрос. Второй более такой частный. Значит, вы говорили о том, что вот когда исследовали спектроимпеданса, что у вас на них появляются две полуокружности. Ну, это вот там видно. Полуокружность вы переносу заряда в твердом слое, а вторую к сопротивлению электрод-электролит. Я бы хотел, чтобы пояснили, что вы имеете в виду под электролитным слоем. В частности, там говорится, что образуется фтор. Я так правильно понял. Откуда он возникает и как вот его можно рассматривать?
And how can it be described as hard, solid electrolyte? As for your first question, hard electrolyte layer, indeed. I think I have something. Yeah. Indeed, we detected lithium-ion spectroscopy showed formation of this layer on the surface of the cathode. It's quite a well-known phenomenon, and because of side process and water, because salts, electrolyte salts in lithium anion is neutralized easily with formation. There can be many processes may occur. Direct dissociation, for example, and the anion itself can get hydrolyzed, and phtor will be the resulting product. So cathode material, and as a lithium phtor is formed, which is one of the components, but for cathodes is one of the most typical components. Hard electrolyte has ionic conductivity, which prevents lithium from being included in the active substance. As for the prospects, this is a complex issue, of course, because in the world thousands of articles are being published, and many of the articles show good results, but only very few authors actually achieve good practical results. So it's hard for me to answer this question, but in my opinion, the approach that we are suggesting, and the purpose of our work was to select the binding agent that potentially could be commercialized, because many works offer interesting methods with interesting characteristics, but which obviously cannot be commercialized. Our approach is quite simple, so we don't need to build new factories to apply our method. So our approach, we think it is interesting, but if it will be commercialized, I don't know. I would like it to be, because I think it has some potential. Hopefully, I satisfied you with my answers. Evgeny Anatolyevich, are you satisfied with the answers? Yes, thank you. Valery Vladimirovich. Dear Rostislav Valeryevich, you presented data for Warburg constant. I don't remember. I don't remember. I think you tried to do something. Could you please remind us? Did you make any calculations to compare with concentration of the carrier in relation to Matthias and Haas representations? have you processed the relation of the Warburg constant to the electrode potential? The concentration of the carriers included according to the theory should depend on the potential. As I remember, I understand, but I'm trying to remember. I think we did not conduct such tests. I think we mostly measured only in charged and uncharged states the difference in potentials. So we did not measure such calculations. Unfortunately, we did not make. Have more questions, or maybe any of the attendees had questions? If no one has questions, let me ask Rostislav V my question. In his in addition to what he presented, his in model representations. Maybe you can briefly talk about them. I think you have slides, so you don't have an issue about describing the potential mechanism. So in addition to result representation, you can give your consideration or your interpretations. Yes, thank you. In the beginning, I will have very limited. So, if I have the opportunity, I have several proposed effects that can improve characteristics, which described using different first scale. First approximation is we have cathodes, some particles of active substance, binding substance, and hydrogen with material with UF, with dielectric properties. So electron can only travel with distributed carbon soot particles. So it will flow like this. So this particle, for example, which was not connected through soot, will remain inactive because it is not connected to cathode. When you use conducting polymer, the binding agent has electric conductivity. The binding agent contacts with all particles on the electrode, so any particle becomes bound, so that can result in better efficiency and high capacity. And also it is demonstrated in distribution. The carbon distributed and regions with lower concentration. Is here with binding agent distribution. Of course, there are some areas with lower concentration, so that can be due to our method. The second point, the second scale, so several particles in contact with each other, and in case material with PVDF transport can occur only in a certain particular areas. Thus, that can result in uneven charge distribution. The areas close to hydrogen contact, and so, of course, on all sides, which can result in more even distribution and in better process efficiency. That will be more obvious in charge-discharge. So all these effects will become more prominent. Different kinetic limitations become effective, that they will become more obvious. experimental results. And one more point, most hypothetical wall. We didn't get any experimental evidence for that. Ion transport can be improved with P.PSS, has ionic conductivity. Cation conductivity, which is useful to us, can carry lithium ions. So how can this, what impact can this have? These orange parts show the binding agent. If a PVDF, we had ions can only enter only in the areas with direct contact areas. So these local areas and some diffusion will occur when binding agent is used. But additional process may occur. Lithium ions on the border with the binding and the ion transport from one sulfur group to another group. And we don't have any evidence, any experimental evidence for that, but hypothetically this may happen. Thank you, Rostislav Valerievich. I think now proceed to the reviews of the members of the Andrei Nikolaevich Alyoshin. I will allow myself not to read the my complete review, and I have to say that efficient energy storage is the most relevant task in the world, and most effective energy storage devices are lithium-ion batteries, which are described in the thesis. In this thesis, the author studied properties and identified the effect of the binding agent of the conducting polymer carboxyl material on the properties of cathode materials. The author is an efficient method of olivine structure by use of water solution of conducting polymer based on P.CMS. I think work has potential practical value, and research conducted by Rostislav V Apraksin, united by a unified approach. Work seems to is a complex piece of research with considerable amount of new experimental results in a relevant research sphere about general regularities of influence of the binding agent on the conducting polymer on properties of cathode materials, LFP and LFMP. Novelty and reliable credibility of the results obtained in the thesis is undoubted. So these are proved by the use of modern high-precision equipment, multiple measurements, and coordination of results obtained by different methods. The undeniable merits of the work are the full correspondence of the objective with the work, the results obtained. At the same time, a number of comments I have as follows. As it seems to me, a number of provisions set forth for defense, such as provisions 2, 3, and 4, appear to be lengthy, and they require shorter, better wordings to communicate the meanings. So that's more of a style. Secondly, the introduction of a binding agent based on PSS was previously well described by different authors. So, this was the author says that in the introduction, pages 27-29. So what new properties of binding agent based on PDOT, PSS and CMS were discovered by the author as compared to results described by the other authors? Well, this question has already been partly answered. An important characteristics of is to operate in a wide range of temperatures. So this is my third question. To study the effect of temperature on the properties of electrode materials, the author showed the impedance spectra from 0 to 34 degrees Celsius. At the temperature dependencies of conductivity, a direct current has been measured for those electrode materials. Question 4. As shown by the author on page 114, polymer coating promotes electronic conductivity on the surface of the individual cells and reduces resistance. For standard PVDF based formulations, charge transfer occurs only the point area of contact with particles. This is the percolation threshold for sodium material known. And finally, let's note 125. The nature of in the system is currently unclear, and further research. In this connection, it's possible to note the contribution nature of ionic transport in the system can be defined in below 200 degrees. The contribution of ionic transport is usually frozen. Have some experiments been conducted or for the PDOT-PSS system? And there's a small remark to a number of figures, such as figure 1.5. The figures are too small. And finally, a list of abbreviations given by the author. The list reflects well the names of materials and constants, but abbreviations of electrochemical terminology has not been explained, such as 0.2 C, etc., which make it difficult for a non-expert in the field of electrochemistry to read the thesis. I'd like to say that these comments do not diminish the overall positive performance, and on the whole, the thesis by Apraksin is carried out on a high scientific and technical level, with a wide range of research methods, contains a number of new results, and is characterized by great practical significance. The thesis by Apraksin, Rostislav V on the influence of conducting polymer binding properties of cathode materials for lithium-ion batteries corresponds to the basic requirements established by the order, the 1st of September 2016, on the order of awarding academic degrees at Petersburg University. And the candidate, Apraksin Rostislav V, deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Chemical Sciences, Specialty 02-0005 Electrochemistry. Paragraph 11 of the order has not been violated by the thesis. Thank you, Andrei Nikolaevich. Colleagues, according to our procedure, the applicant has to answer all the questions after all the reviews have been presented, and I think that probably makes sense, because I think some of the comments will probably be the same. So if you don't mind, let us proceed with the reviews, and I would like to give the floor to Valery Veniaminovich Malev. Unlike most other members of the Dissertation Council, I don't have any principal critical remarks to the contents of the thesis. I think we all had an opportunity to see during the presentation. So we all had the opportunity to see that this is a good work. Objectives have been set clearly, and the author has achieved his objectives. Another question, of course, is how exhausting, learning is endless, and as much work awaits the author that may probably duplicate this research, in the course of which some further specific features, peculiarities will be discovered. So it will be interesting how the Warburg constant depends on the potentials, and it will be interesting to interpret, to explain these results, or attempt to do this. And of course, it's possible to ask additional questions, but I think that maybe there is no point to do it now, because the most important point of this work, in addition to solving a particular practical task, the most important point, which I would like to emphasize, and looking at the results of the thesis, is I was convinced this is real credible. The results are credible, and so that's why I don't have any principal comments, major comments. I think this thesis completely corresponds to all the requirements set to such works, and I'm sure that Rostislav Valerievich deserves the degree of candidate of chemical sciences. Thank you. Thank you, Valery Veniaminovich. Evgeny Anatольевич, please, your
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Прежде чем начать свое выступление, я хотел бы поблагодарить руководство Петербургского университета, что пригласили меня участвовать в диссертационной работе. Ну а теперь по существу работы. Значит, я, с позволения, точечно остановлюсь на моментах работы. В целом она, как я писал в своем отзыве, она мне очень понравилась, хорошая. Не надо доказывать релятивное практически домашнее устройство. Чем они будут работать, тем лучше и для каждого будет. Значит, очень логично построена работа, начиная с литературного обзора, в котором рассматривается вот именно по существу то, что в диссертации представляет интерес. И показана ниша, которая будет заполняться диссертантом. Подробно описано, что позволяет сделать выводы о том, значит, достоверно и детально был проведен эксперимент. Ну и, собственно, экспериментальная часть здесь тоже очень логично все представлено, поскольку начинается она с таких фоновых кривых, то есть показывает диссертант, что он получил, какие материалы, снимает фоновые кривые для электропроводящего полимера, показывает, что выражена, а затем уже начинает. Что-то прервалось или все слышно?
Am I online? Can you hear me? Yes, yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you. Please continue.
Хорошо. И далее в последующих главах уже диссертантом рассмотрен механизм функционирования данных систем. На удачным я считаю еще наличие вот 4 главы, в которой проводится такое резюме как бы и сопоставление с литературными данными, что позволяет подытожить весь материал. Ну, я, наверное, написал больше, чем все другие, значит, совета замечаний, но они такие, скорее, рекомендательного плана. Что мне немножко вот не понравилось. Ну, в частности, вот первое замечание касается аббревиатуры. Аббревиатура как-то очень сильно пересыщена. Но здесь вот в данном случае я не против использования аббревиатур для органических там соединений. Метилен, камин, тетрапусная кислота, там легче ДТА, там и другие. Но вот для неорганических, когда вот литий, фосфат лития, железо 2, писать вместо вот аббревиатуру, как-то она меня немножко не нравится, короче говоря. Это идет распространение такой сильной аббревиатуры, на мой взгляд, в частности, китайские исследователи так широко. Я, кстати, пытаюсь как-то бороться, немножко это перспективно. Когда ошибочная и неточная терминология, но в частности разные выражения типа чистый фосфат лития, железо. Значит, дальше тут третье замечание у меня такого частного плана. На данный момент считаю, что одномерное преимущество 0,1,0. Так, в работе было показано, что давление обладает наименьшей энергией миграции противоречий. С одной стороны, скатывается на миграцию. Не совсем не разобрался, и вот хотел уточнить, тоже в виде вопроса по этому замечанию такого. Из текста диссертации неясно содержание углерода в катоде за счет наличия карбонизированной добавки фосфата. То есть там использовались фосфаты, которые изначально содержали вот этот углерод, и плюс еще добавлялся. Пятое замечание у меня коснулось оформления. На мой взгляд, субъективно, я немножко для облегчения восприятия больше значений, в частности, демонстрировал, там вот был перед этим рисунок 4, где картинка, вот эта частичка, ядро, оболочка такая вот система. Там вот розовым изображено это полимерное связующее, проводящее. Это уже потом только догадываешься. И немножко, может быть, более сложное замечание, что системы это двухэлектродные ячейки с электродом сравнения, но первых вот двухэлектродных больше. Во-первых, не надо использовать понятие электродного потенциала, там надо согласно рекомендациям. Следующее замечание у меня, что там коснулось отдельного предложения на странице 58, написано, что рентгенофазовый анализ не согласен. P21, это замечание коснулось, по сути дела, погрешности напряжения с точностью до 1 милливольта, 91, 156. Ясно, что это поинт интервала. Страница 84, это последнее мое замечание, немножко более сложное, мне хотелось бы услышать подробно от диссертанта. Значит, там приводится такое предложение. Зависит от пика скорости позволяет характеризовать кинетику химического процесса. Ток, значит, коэффициент скорости развертки потенциала и B. Ну и вот, как я ранее говорил, немножко вот не всегда конкретизируется как потенциал, когда напряжение. то вот этого конкретного уравнения, оно используется для электродного потенциала. Использовали ли вы его в случае, когда у вас была физика, и насколько это обосновано? В целом, я считаю, что работа очень хорошая, и все мои замечания не мешают значимость.
Overall positive impression made by the thesis. The presentation was also very good. The results presented very logically. And I believe that the thesis by Apraksin, Rostislav V, influence of conducting polymer bind on properties of cathode materials for lithium-ion batteries, corresponds to the key requirements established by the order on the order of awarding academic degrees in Petersburg University. And the applicant, Apraksin Rostislav V, deserves the degree of candidate of chemical sciences, specialty 020005, electrochemistry. Clause 11 of the order has not been violated by the thesis. Thank you. Thank you, Evgeny Anatolievich. Alexander Mikhailovich. Please present your review. If you allow me, I will not do the obligatory provisions such as relevance, practical relevance. I describe those in my review. I have very good positive impression. Let me express my opinion as other works where Valerievich is the academic advisor. The work is very well planned. All the very clearly identified, and all the tests have been conducted very well. I am surprised by the high level of experimental work, by the length of the thesis. Maybe this is not obvious from the brief presentation, but the work really makes a very good, very positive impression. If you look at the number of carried out experiments and tests. As for the comments, here maybe focus a little on comments. In almost every section of the thesis, the author notes that the polymer binding provides sufficient adhesion of the electrode material to the surface, which is logical. If you add something and this substance is a binding agent, adhesion is a necessary requirement. Yet, as the author says, he studies this property by visual inspection of electrodes, by bending them. Of course, visual inspection to achieve better description of adhesion will be easy to describe adhesion better by conducting a series of simple tests, and I know the equipment is available. Similar comment I have concerning the description of distribution of various elements on the electrodes. The assessment was made visually, says even or more even, similar distribution to that of iron, in a situation where you have excellent photos and graphical material obtained by X-ray spectroscopy. Simple computer analysis could be used to obtain more scientific, speaking of particle size, particle accumulation. As for minor values, you have many charts, but approximation is not mentioned anywhere, or errors, so we don't know anything about that. I will not say, give any of the minor comments, maybe like free, somewhat liberal attitude to the Russian names, but that was already mentioned by a colleague from Belarus. But generally speaking, I think this is an excellent thesis, and I think that the thesis by Apraksin Rostislav V corresponds to the basic requirements of the order or awarding academic degrees in Petersburg University, and the candidate deserves a degree of candidate of chemical sciences, specialty, electrochemistry. Clause 11 of the order has not been violated by the thesis. Thank you. Thank you, Alexander Mikhailovich. Valery Pavlovich. Relevance has already been mentioned of the work and its practical value, and I have a similar opinion. And as for speaking of relevance, in such rapidly developing sphere, it's quite hard to find your place, because hundreds of companies and laboratories are working in this sphere, but the author succeeded to find a sphere in which they are leaders, judging by in distinguished international journals. And so, if you allow me, I would like to go straight to my comments. Two minor comments. My third comment is more of an advice. As for my first comment, as was already mentioned by colleagues, is by removing water, extracting water from electrodes, by heating in vacuum at 80 degrees in vacuum. But this residual water was not controlled. I think specialists is working with bound water up to 200 degrees. It's quite move such absorbed water even at 200 degrees, and well, the amount of this water is quite small, but I think it does affect. It will be interesting to hear what the author thinks about that. Next, I have another minor comment that using carbonized lithium-ion phosphate composition, but carbon on the surface of particles is not mentioned anywhere, and it will be interesting in the model. Should be mentioned. Is there any produce any screening effect? And my third comment is more of an advice, as more efficient use of the infrared spectroscopy method to measure this residual water quantity. It's possible to follow water content in situ, and the role of Calibron contains water itself and can be removed even at 450 degrees. But generally, to sum it up, to sum up my review, the thesis generally corresponds to all the requirements, and Rostislav Valeryevich deserves the degree. And in short, if I could sum up, I would like to congratulate the academic advisor on such an excellent thesis, such well done work, so well done. So obvious that the applicant is very familiar, has mastered did not obtain the tablets. Of course, he obtained many tablets, not only tablets that we saw the final results, but in addition to a significant contribution for the university, is important to train an expert who will work in this sphere, Yofa Institute, leading physical research, Russian research institution. Well, thank you. I think now it's my turn to present my review. I don't want to bother you with the relevance of this research is quite obvious, and I think that it's also important that the idea to use as a binding agent, the conducting polymer, seems to be very obvious, but the detailed research is still necessary. The devil is in the detail, and great attention has been paid to details, genetic characteristics, diffusion characteristics. And when I found that the applicant in his main presentation he didn't do model representations, that is why I asked him to talk about these, because even though these models are hypothetical at the moment, I think very important and useful. Some guidelines, maybe they will not take you where you want to be, and they may name a different route, but it's good to have them anyways. And as for the significance, I absolutely agree the clarification made by the applicant that the matter is not, the point is not only to finding fairly good composition, but in the scale without any significant changes in the alterations in technologies necessary. Sometimes you find something really good, but which is impossible to use. I read this thesis several months ago, and I had several comments and some questions, to which Rostislav V gave me very detailed answers. So we had a discussion. We discussed his thesis for several hours. The current edition of his thesis answers most of my comments and questions, and I have only very formal questions, critical remarks. For example, it's necessary that soot has a tendency to agglomerate. Since I have some experience with carbon soot, it was interesting for me how it was prepared for use. Next, in his experiments, they use silver chloride electrodes as a second kind of electrode. A pseudo-electric electrode. It was calibrated relative to the standard silver electrode, so it would be better to give potentials relative to the standard one, or maybe to duplicate them to make it easier to compare this data with the general data. Next, it has already been discussed. The approximations are not always well described. Figure 315 shows dependence and activity of Petersburg and lithium perchlorate. Would be good to give approximation and to analyze to what extent this can be considered. This dependence can be considered linear. So maybe it's linear, maybe it's not. And finally, there are some unfortunate expressions such as the most optimal. But of course, these comments are purely formal, and they do not affect the main content of the thesis and do not cause any doubt conclusions made by the thesis. And I think that the thesis by Apraksin Rostislav V influence of conducting polymer bonding on properties of cathode materials for lithium-ion batteries meets the requirements established by the order on the awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the applicant, Apraksin Rostislav V, deserves the degree of candidate of chemical sciences, specialty 020005 Electrochemistry. Clause 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the applicant. Thank you. Well, Rostislav Valerievich, now please answer. You have the opportunity to answer the comments that you have tried to make it, to do this in 15 minutes. Thank you for your comments, for your reviews, dear members of the Dissertation Council. I accept with most of the comments about presentation and bad wording and mistakes. I agree with these comments. I apologize for those. And as for more substantial criticism, I have made a list of those. Start with Evgeny Anatolyevich Streltsov about diffusion and migration. This was inaccuracy. I mean diffusion, but in the article to which the term migration is migration spreads a particle. This is a theoretical article, so the author doesn't only look at the path the electron travel. Concentration gradient diffusion is not studied by the author, so that was my mistake. Next, it's important about electrode potential and voltage. This is voltage is better, but in my opinion, in Russian is more common. Electrode potential can be used if the second electrode is non-polarized, precise no potential value. The correct wording. Maybe maybe I made some mistakes, but I don't agree that this term cannot be used altogether. And second questions about dependence of. I don't agree. This dependence is very prominent, very obvious. I had data for impedance of two electron cells, and they're quite similar by resistance, order of resistance. So 2 and 3 electron cells. If we talk of ohmic resistance, is about close to 5 ohms, so 3 milliampere. So potential displacement is 15 millivolt. I think it is as all order do not affect the conclusions made in analyzing this type of dependencies. As for comments of Andrei Nikolaevich, as for PSS properties have been known before, has been studied in the recent years. In 1617, so this kind of competition, but PSS and CMC, this type of data were not presented. They are not very different, but still. But what is really new is visible, how conductivity is preserved in a wide range. So I think this is something new described by us. As for measurement at low temperature. So we did not. No, so we didn't conduct such measurements. As for percolation threshold, I didn't measure this. I found some information in literature. As for percolation threshold, there's a minimum amount of conducting added to the composite material, which minimum amount of conducting additive that crazy electric binding properties. Its relation is this. I found this in literature, one of the articles, and 7% for PVDF, and graphite was about 8%. But there's little information on this, and I couldn't find this information elsewhere. As for ionic conductivity at low temperatures, we did not conduct such experiments. It will be interesting because I couldn't find any mention of this in literature, but we need to change the system because traditional electrolytes will freeze at such temperatures. So it will be interesting to conduct experiments, so that will be an interesting thing to do. As for Alexander Mikhailovich adhesion, yes, because we didn't have own equipment to measure, make quantitative measurements. As commercial labs, where I know there are commercial labs where such tests can be conducted, and of course I plan to conduct such experiments, such tests in the future. As for EDX pictures, I tried to conduct such analysis. Didn't see any significant advantages for result presentation, so I kept those pictures, and I limited myself to visual representation. Comments by Valery Pavlovich for drying samples. We dried at relatively low temperature, 80 degrees, which is a standard procedure. Higher temperatures not good for PSS, so thermal degradation may occur at high temperatures, so that's why we chose such conditions, but some residual absorbed water could be present, and its quantitative analysis can be useful. As for IR spectrum, I agree the presentation is not accurate, and IR study, spectroscopy, will be helpful. The IR spectrum presented in my work was not to detect water, but to detect PSS absorption band, wide band absorption. 3,500 centimeters. As for carbon coating, indeed, I didn't mention it. Materials without such coating they have very low conductivity. They don't work. So we conducted materials with such use in our experiments, and they had much worse performance. The main role of this coating is to improve conductivity. Has been studied quite well, and there's a separate comment about the quantity, but the quantity has not been measured. But since it has not been, the material was not measured, it's the same material. So we assumed that carbon content is the same, and we only looked at the soot content. And a comment by Konstantin Nikolaevich was my potential presented comparison to standard. So the wording was bad. As for graphite soot preparation, so we didn't prepare it specially, but when preparing materials, we mix them in a grinder, binding agent, and after thermal processing, large soot particles are destroyed and they are captured by polymer, and we were able to obtain relatively small soot particles. But as for ion conductivity, I made a picture of. It's hard to talk about linear dependence. Yet on the other hand, in the text I say the dependence between ion conductivity and electrolyte concentration for this system is not that pronounced as compared to the aqua systems described, and this is we got some evidence describe it functionally. Thank you, Rostislav Valerievich. Dear colleagues, dear members of the Decision Council, the applicant has answered our comments. If anyone is not satisfied, please say so. If not, if everybody is satisfied, we shall proceed. Let us proceed. I understand that everybody is satisfied. Then I have a question to the attendees. Does anyone here want to make a very, very brief speech? If not, I see we don't have any speakers here. Let me give the floor to the academic advisor, Veniamin Vadimovich. Thank you. I have a review by the academic which covers all the key points. I will not read it. I will only focus on the key points briefly. The thesis submitted by Rostislav Valerievich for our department and for me personally was a pioneer piece of research. We started new research in the lithium-ion batteries, and many things we had to do for the first time. And as it is obvious, as we can see, Rostislav Valerievich had to overcome many challenges of experimental nature, and not only of experimental nature, work with lots of literature, discuss approaches, choose a specific field for our research, which in my opinion is very good. I'd like to say that since we started this work, the interest to conducting polymer additives has increased significantly, as we can see from other publications. The applicant worked very hard, was highly qualified, his approach was very conscientious. I am very satisfied with Rostislav Valerievich's work, and I would like to read the obligatory statement for his attitude, for his thoroughness in obtaining results. I believe that the thesis corresponds to the requirements to candidate's thesis, and its author, Apraksin Rostislav Valerievich, deserves the degree of candidate of chemical sciences, specialty 020005, electrochemistry. Thank you, dear colleagues. Now It's I'm kindly requesting you to stop. Well, dear colleagues, our discussion has taken place and time has come for the open individual voting on awarding the academic degree of candidate of physical science, specialty electrochemistry, to Rostislav V. Apraksin. And I will ask council members in the alphabetical order, starting with Andrei Nikolaevich Alyoshin. I'm for awarding the degree. Are our microphones on? Yes, I would like to vote for awarding the degree. Valery Veniaminovich Malev, your opinion? I am also positive that Rostislav Valeryevich deserves this degree. Evgeny Anatolovich Streltsov. Yes, I am for awarding the academic degree. Thank you. Alexander Mikhailovich Timonov, I am for awarding the academic degree. Thank you. Valery Pavlovich Tolstoy, award. And is also, let's award the degree. Thank you, everybody. The counting the votes is easy. Thank you. Could you hear? Maybe we should repeat just in case. My opinion is to award the degree. Counting the votes is easy, 6-0, and these results will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting that for awarding the degree, 6 members of the council voted, no one voted against, and no one abstained. Thus, the decision to award the degree of candidate of chemical sciences, specialty 020005 electrochemistry, to Apraksin Rostislav Valeryevich has been made. I congratulate you. And you have 2 minutes for your closing remarks. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank all the members of the Dissertation Council for coming here, for taking the time, the chairman, and also first of all, I would like to thank my academic advisor, Professor Kondratiev, for devoting his time, giving his time to me. I'd like to thank many students and doctoral students of Yofa Institute who also contributed. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Alexander Rumyantsev and Zhdanov. Without their contribution, my work will be very hard. And I would also like to thank my friends and my family for their support. And without you, I won't be able to achieve this. Thank you. Well, our session is over. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Please stop the broadcasting.